Hi everyone. I wanted to take just a few minutes to sum up this season or this year of Formula One. It was an exciting championship down to the last minutes, and so I just wanted to take a quick look back at the year and share some of my favorite moments and some of my thoughts with you. And so the appropriate way to share thoughts about Formula One is with a notebook. You may have seen Ted's notebook before if you watched Sky, but this is as close as I have. It's my panda note. So I hope you will like the panda note coverage. And yeah, so and even if you're not that into Formula One, I'll just try to be pretty general in my speaking so that it can be enjoyable and just maybe teach you something about the year. So let's see. We have to open it to just the right page where I've made my notes. Okay. If you watch, you may know that I keep a lot of important things in my panda note, and yeah, this is no exception. And I made these. Let's see. I made these notes last night. I made these notes last night in the dark while I was watching something else on TV, so they're kind of scattered, but you can kind of see in blue here my Formula One thoughts. So I know how I tend to ramble, so I just thought I would write them all down for you. So, and I'll sort of tick them off with my pencil as we go along. So anyway, so let's begin. So this was the 2014 year of Formula One. And so I want to go over some of my season highlights. The first thing I wanted to mention was that there were some really wonderful new, I call them new kids on the grid, and they're actually not new completely to Formula One racing, but they were for me the two newer drivers who most impressed me and excited me, and those are Daniel Ricciardo and Valtteri Bottas. And so I will talk a little bit about Danny and a little bit about Valtteri. And I'm guessing these aren't controversial choices because these are both very likable drivers as well as very skilled. So I don't think very many people will disagree with me that these were two of the most fun drivers to watch out there. So I'll start with Ricardo, or Ricciardo, depending on how you choose to say it. Daniel says it Ricardo, so That's how I'll say it. So Daniel Ricciardo had a really great early season and a really great mid-season. He was really impressive, and I think even Christian Horner at Red Bull expressed that he was very surprised. They had expected a lot of Daniel, but I don't think anyone quite expected the level of performance they got right out of the gate from him. Of course, early on, he was given a podium and then had it taken away due to some mechanical regulations. We know for, actually that's a good point, for Red Bull Racing, this was sort of a difficult year in terms of perception. I think the perception game for Red Bull was not great. People sort of saw that they were bending, twisting rules when they could. But that just depends on, I guess, your perspective. So, in any case, Daniel has been a great racer for a long time. He's young, but he did win the Formula 3 championship. I meant to hold up 3 fingers. He did win the Formula 3 championship back in 2009, and that was really a big victory for him and really started to kind of put him on the map. He came up racing with people like Jean-Eric Vergne, who has obviously not had the same positive experience, at least this year, in Formula 1 racing. So, anyhow, and Daniel is also really famous for his overwhelmingly positive attitude, and I just love that. I think it's easy to sort of complain and say, oh, this person should have handled this better, this person should have said or not said this and that, but you know, the stakes for these drivers are so high that it's easy to understand why they get upset, sometimes apoplectic, and sometimes really don't even want to, do interviews or deal with the press at all. But Daniel, both in winning and losing, is sort of a champ in his own right. He, pages are still together. Daniel is famous for his big, goofy grin, and it's kind of a nice counterpoint to the way Mark Webber left F1. Mark Webber was also from Australia and also racing with teammate Sebastian Vettel, and of course Mark Webber had some legitimate grievances, but he seems quite happy now. But it's nice to see sort of a joyful Australian back on the grid, and so I'm sure that's wonderful for all the Australian fans. Anyhow, so he did even begin to beat out Sebastian Vettel, or Seb. Everyone calls him Seb. And I think that's when people, really started to say, what is with this kid? He's sometimes out qualifying, often out racing Sebastian Vettel. And Sebastian Vettel, if you don't know, is a four-time world champion. And that may seem, I don't know, that might not mean a lot to you if you don't follow Formula One, but if you do, it's a very big deal. it was 4 years in a row, so total dominance. And Sebastian was also the youngest world champion, so there was an entire era where he was just dominating, and of course his car and team were dominating as well. But to be fair to Sebastian Vettel, let's see, next point to Seb. So, to be fair, Sebastian Vettel had to really adapt to a very new kind of car this season. You may know that the formula was changed greatly between seasons, and so the cars had to basically be built from the ground up due to a lot of restrictions on power and engines, that sort of thing, and also dealing with the difference in downforce. And so Sebastian, again, who had been so dominant, really kind of struggled because he was adapting to something he wasn't used to. Whereas I think with Daniel Ricciardo here, I wrote that I felt that, I strongly felt that Daniel, he had to learn a new car as well, but he's so young and fresh, and just has proven to be really one of the most adaptable drivers out there. And so, I give him so much credit for that. But at the same time, it's understandable that some of the champions we're used to seeing were less competitive this year because they had really come to rely on one kind of car and one kind of racing. And a lot of that was kind of turned on its head this season. So anyway, but that was just so exciting, and I love to watch. I love to watch Daniel race. He is just courageous, and you can feel that he's having fun out there on the track. He is really good at overtaking so methodically. He plans his moves sometimes very far in advance. You'll see him sort of setting up a move or an overtake, and he also is creative about where he overtakes. I think he will sometimes lure people into thinking he's gonna go one way, he's gonna zig, and then he zags instead. He loves chicanes, and is always excited about a track with a lot of racing features, because he will often overtake at unexpected places, and at some of those really difficult to maneuver places, which makes it quite difficult to defend your position when he's coming at you. So he is sort of that perfect combination of, he's a thinking driver, he's an analytical driver, but at the same time he has the courage to follow his instincts when that opportunity comes up. And it did come up a few times this year, and I think out of everybody, he really, really seized that. So it's, it's always fun to watch, and a little unpredictable with Danny. But even when he does, if he's overtaken, he, again, talking about his courage, he really, really, he will fight. He will fight to get back what is his, the place that he feels like he really needs. And he did that well in the mid-season and in the beginning of the season. I think toward the end, the Williams team I should say again that Daniel is with Red Bull Racing. The Williams team really started to catch up to a lot of people's surprise, and it was a good surprise. It was exciting, and that brings me to Valtteri Bottas. Valtteri Bottas. I'm gonna say it again. Valtteri Bottas. It's sounds a bit like the name of a video game hero or something. Oh yeah, I said that. Oh, I wrote down that he's the nicer Finn in Formula One. Not all Finnish drivers are very talkative and sociable, so Valtteri seems like a really very calm, very cool, very collected, but at the same time approachable, friendly driver and person. So yes, Valtteri Bottas. This is probably not of much interest to anyone really into the sport, but I always know, I wrote it down here, that he has the most amazing skin. Valtteri Bottas does. It's just like, it's amazing. His skin is so beautiful, and he comes, he always comes off of out of a race, and he has the perfect sort of like blush to his cheek, just like perfectly flushed. And anyway, I always want to know what he's using, what products he's using on his skin. So beautiful. Anyway, but that's not what makes him a great driver. So Valtteri had a little bit of a stumbling start, and in Australia had a little bit of a crash, which he recovered from. But it certainly took the Williams team a while to, I think, really be able to give him the equipment he needed to really race competitively. However, he also had to sort of overcome the pressure he felt, or must have felt, with Felipe Massa as a teammate this year. And Felipe Massa is, he's not just a great racer, he's sort of a celebrity. He's well known, he's beloved, and Felipe Massa has actually sort of, out of everybody, he's come back from being in really treacherous danger medically. He had a really horrible incident where he was actually very, very close to having had a fatal accident, and he overcame it. So he's also sort of he's like a superhero to a lot of us, and so Felipe Massa is wonderful to watch. And I think there's a lot of assumption that, just like on Red Bull Racing with Sebastian and with Daniel, that Felipe Massa would sort of obviously dwarf and upstage Valtteri Bottas. And that really wasn't the case. And I was actually quite happy to see the interaction between these two, because I felt that, I really, really felt that Massa was very genuinely happy for his teammate and his team, the entire Williams team, who just sort of exemplify the joy and triumph of the sport. So, as a family, and they also obviously are doing, I think, the most to promote a woman driver and things like that. So go Williams. Anyway, so yes, Valtteri did get a boost though in that Australian Grand Prix to 5th place, which really, that's a pretty great result. And that was after, unfortunately though, after Daniel Ricciardo, like we talked about before, Daniel Ricciardo was disqualified, like I said, because of apparent breaches in some of the rules that had nothing to do with him and nothing to do with his driving. It had everything to do with his car and the mechanics and things. So anyway, so that was a somewhat dramatic moment for, no one really wants to get ahead of that way, but it did help push him up in the points early on. So and I've said, like I said before, Valtteri just has this calm and steady air about him, and he really maintains that in and out of his car. And I think that is a huge component of his success as a driver. I mean, really, it takes a lot to take in everything and to put everything on the line and do it in such a calm and classy way, but he always does. He doesn't hide from the media, but he also doesn't, he doesn't ever sort of, he's never the one in the headlines for, saying anything out of line or causing drama. So anyway, yeah, so I think it's really largely that temperament that I was talking about, the calm, steady demeanor that really helped him, not only as a racer and an individual, but like I said with Williams, I think it really helped to redefine that team as a team that was clean, that was proud, and that was going to do everything the right way, and kind of slow and steady wins the race, and just building and building on the inertia that they had. And I was really delighted to watch it. It just seemed, positive for everyone. The Williams family seemed closer than ever, and excited, so excited. So a lot of sparkling eyes around that garage. Yeah, I think I already covered this, that I wanted to say that, just like Daniel Ricciardo, Valtteri Bottas had, to kind of step out of the shadow of a superstar racer who was his teammate, and I think he really did that and asserted himself. So, and he was sort of, as a key part of his victories and of how well he did in the championship. Valtteri was always there when the Mercs, or the Mercury, or the Mercedes gave out. And I'll talk just in a minute about the Mercedes team this year. But he was always there if he sensed or heard that the Mercs were having trouble. Valtteri was right there, and he was ready to seize on that and seize the opportunity. And again, Daniel was able to do the same thing a couple times, but Valtteri was quite consistent about staying up there, and making sure that they knew that it wasn't always just going to be a Sunday drive for the Mercedes team. And he did well by that. And it's much more interesting to watch a race when everybody's in the race and it's not just, two out in front. So I'll talk about that in just a second. But yeah, just to say, that both racers, both Daniel Ricciardo and Valtteri Bottas, are so, I sense them to be just, even though they're young, and typically the young drivers can be a bit moody and they can be sort of, I guess, they lack media training and that kind of thing. I feel like, with these two, you just get classy, professional, and personable drivers, and that's good for not just for the sport on the track, but it's good for the sport in terms of drawing in viewers to watch and engage with the drivers and pick favorites based on who they want to see succeed and win. I think it's really neat. So anyway, moving on to the silver arrows here. Okay, so now I will talk a little bit about the Mercedes. This year, Mercedes team was completely dominant, and I don't think before winter testing anyone quite expected that, and to say that this was one of the most dominant cars in F1 history sounds short-sighted, but if you look at the statistics overall, this car, the W05 Hybrid, is actually the most statistically best performing car in Formula One ever. So, and so you have a resurgence of total domination by Mercedes, and this was really a huge shakeup to teams that had been dominant in the past, like Red Bull. And the term silver arrows, which I've written here, actually goes back to 1930s Grand Prix racing. Silver arrows, I guess, if you think about it, the Mercedes car is silver, and it flies through the air. So the silver arrows became sort of the talk of the town, and really the only flaw in this car and this team was the reliability of it. There were a few instances where reliability completely ruined the race for both drivers, typically at different times, notably once at the same time, but both Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton, the drivers, had to really sort of fear and be ready for reliability issues. Now, when you think of a car this dominant, when you go that fast, when you go all around the world and have all kinds of conditions and temperature, atmosphere, and day, night, there's all kinds of variables that are so hard to account for. So of course, every vehicle at some point is going to deal with reliability issues. They were just very obvious for Mercedes because everybody got so used to the 1-2 punch of having the Mercedes both locking out the front row of qualifying, as well as taking the top tier stands on the podium for first and second place almost every race, or something close to that. So Mercedes won the Constructors' Championship by a mile, or many miles, traveled very quickly. If again you're not super familiar with Formula One racing. It is a challenge for the constructor of the car, as well as for each individual driver, and that's why you have teammates like Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg, who in a way are a team and are working together and did work together to bring Mercedes that Constructors' Championship very early on. But also they have to race against one another for the Drivers' Championship, which is really what everyone's excited about anyhow. So, but I will say that, all signs indicate that next year Mercedes will dominate again. It's going to take the other cars, I think, still some time to try to catch up, to find time, and to find ways of getting up there. Even with the resurrection of Honda participating in Formula One, I still think that we're going to see a very dominant Mercedes team, although my hope would be to see more variety in that front row, in the front part of the grid, and see more teams more competitive with these drivers. So I told you about the term silver arrows and how it predates the origins of F1. So the big story all year, as it often is the Battle of Champions. And Lewis Hamilton had won one world championship before his championship win this year. And then Nico Rosberg, his teammate, who used to be teammate to Michael Schumacher, Nico has never won, but is also not as experienced in some ways as Lewis, although the boys did grow up together karting, and depending on the day and time you ask them and what their relationship is like at that time, often they'll say they were quite good friends growing up, and sometimes they'll say, well, we knew each other, but I do get the sense that there is a friendship there, but it's difficult to be friends with your competition. So anyhow, so the one thing I will say is that even though the car Mercedes produced there's no way to argue that it's not an amazing car, but it also has to do their victory, their complete lockout victory, I think has to do with the fact that they also had two drivers who are very well matched in ability. So both Lewis and Nico knew how to handle the car and took responsibility for the car. I think they both really fell in love with the car and were able to get the most out of it. So that's definitely worth saying. And I made a note about the other champions, former world champions, being notably cowed by the car. A lot of times in sports, especially in American sports, I perceive a lot of smack talk, if you will. I think that's just part of the tradition, and a lot of confidence, rather inflated confidence or sort of invincible confidence. So in Formula One, especially this year, you had a lot of other champions or former champions or just superstars, people who are wonderful drivers and have been around for a while, clamoring for the best of the rest, as it was often called. The best of the rest. And so rather than fighting for those upper tiers on the podium, the first, the second, everybody was sort of fighting for, well, maybe I can at least get in there and get third place. Maybe I can at least get in there and get some points. But I don't think anyone ever really came into a race weekend thinking I'm gonna beat the Mercedes, no problem. So it was interesting to watch that. And I think in the beginning of the season, some of those drivers felt a little like the wind had been taken out of their sails. But by the end of the season, I think they were back to really fighting each other and giving us great wheel-to-wheel racing anyway, despite knowing that they weren't contenders for first and second place. So I mentioned that I felt like Lewis and Nico were strong drivers for the team. I also felt that they were really complementary drivers. Both drivers were, matched, but had really brought really separate traits to the team. And they, of course, were sort of in their own league, Nico and Lewis. They were sort of racing a different race and in sort of their own championship where they kind of knew, realistically, this is between us. I think everybody knew that pretty quickly. And of course, they did at times come to really, really almost despise each other momentarily because of just the pressures of fighting for a world championship. And so you had Niki Lauda and Toto Wolff, both from Mercedes, sort of scolding them like little boys or babysitters, and really having to come in and mediate time after time, some of these fights that were happening, both on the grid and with the media and in conferences, in meetings, and even on social media. So I think there was a breaking point where everything played out and resulted in, I think, both of the boys getting, both of the drivers getting scolded, and Rosberg was actually given a penalty, made to pay a fine for his petulance on the track because they perceived some of what he had done to be unsafe. And of course, if you think about it, when you're a team lead, you have to think about each driver separately, and you want to let them race each other and fight out the championship. But at the end of the day, if they crash into each other, then that whole championship is gone because they are taking each other out. So that's always sort of the line for the team leads. It's like, to what degree do you just let them race and go wild and zip around and fight each other wheel to wheel? And at what point do you intercede and draw a line and say, no, that's not how we're going to do it. You have to bring the car in. You can't just throw at each other. So that was a challenge for everyone on the team. So yes, that did result in Nico taking a fine at one point, but there were also times when they ruled that it was Lewis who was misbehaving, especially in some of the ways he would act when the meetings and the races were over, and what he was saying to the media and that kind of thing. So anyway, they seem okay now, and I always want everyone to be friends. So, except Kimi Räikkönen. I don't think Kimi Räikkönen believes in friends. So, I'm just kidding. Okay, so talking about how they drove this year, Lewis Hamilton is, he's brash, he's confident, he's so confident, and he's really daring. And this gives him some really unmatched speed. He's a speed demon, I always say. Speed Racer song. He's a demon on wheels. He's a demon on wheels for sure. Lewis Hamilton, and a lot of people love that about him. They love to watch Lewis, and so you'll notice that his key strategies, I guess the things that characterize his success are late braking for one. Again, if you think about it, these cars have, they have straightaways, and then they also have, chicanes and turns and S-curves and all kinds of things, sleeping policemen. And so the later that you can brake, especially if you have a real big turn coming off of a straightaway, the later you can brake, one of the benefits of it is you stay at your top speed just a little bit longer. And that's something Lewis has always done. He really pushes to the last minute. He pushes the limit of what seems possible so that he gets more out of his top speed runs. And it can be pretty gripping to watch. But at the same time, he is just a formidable wheel-to-wheel racer. I would say that out of everyone racing now, Lewis Hamilton, Alonso, those are the top two really for wheel-to-wheel racing, and he is just not somebody you want to see coming up in your rear, because he gets the job done. He really almost always gets the job done. So, and of course he has the speed to do it. However, I would say that Lewis has a somewhat mercurial constitution, and he is prone to moodiness, to sometimes getting a little bit angry, taking things a little bit personally, and he does have, as much as he seems like this ultra confident guy, this tough guy, he actually, in my opinion, has quite a delicate ego. He really is still at heart a boy who wants to make his dad proud, who wants to make everyone proud, who wants to make his dreams come true. And he has this really delicate ego, and I think that's why sometimes having someone like Nico Rosberg as a teammate can be a little bit triggering for him. Of course, there's a lot of egos out there, both in the cars and in the garages, so anyway. But it can cause him to stutter out on the track. Sometimes he will lock up. You'll see his wheels locking up quite often, actually, and little puffs of smoke coming out because he's locked up one of his wheels again. And you'll also see that he doesn't pit very well. Now, that seems kind of silly to say. I wonder if I can draw you sort of just what I'm talking about. You probably won't even be able to see it because of the wonky lighting as ever, but if you have a pit, and let's say that you have a target for where you need to pit your car, because you have mechanics on every side, and someone who comes around the front with a pivoting jack, and so people need to be on all sides in order to give you fuel, in order to replace your tires, and possibly to maybe adjust if there's anything that needs adjusting on the front wing, all of that kind of stuff. And so if you don't pull your car perfectly into this space here, you make all of these people who are set up to get you going in just honestly a matter of seconds. If you've never seen an F1 pit stop, I highly recommend checking it out on YouTube. It's amazing. But Lewis is not the best at positioning, and just being a little bit off on that can cause a lot of extra time. The difference between, say, a pit stop that's 2.7 seconds and a pit stop that's 3.2 seconds is a pretty big deal. So really positioning that correctly is just so important, and it's something that Lewis doesn't always achieve perfectly, and it is something that Nico Rosberg is quite good at. And so a lot of times actually they'll look at times, you know, and if Nico has let's say Nico gets 2.8 and Lewis gets like a 3.3 second pit, people will look at that and sometimes they'll say, oh, it's a conspiracy. Mercedes is a German team and Nico Rosberg is a German driver. Lewis Hamilton is British. So sometimes people come up with these really silly ideas about there being a conspiracy to actually pit Lewis more slowly. But if you watch closely, his positioning is just not always exactly where it needs to be, whereas Nico's is almost perfectly spot on every time. Not every single time, but that's typically what it comes down to. So that's one of Lewis's, I think, areas where he will need to work a little bit, and I do think he has been improving at it, so that's good. Okay, so where were we? On my spot again. Yes, so that, I think that kind of sums up Lewis as a driver, and kind of what his season was like, but it was amazing. He's, like I said, he's a demon on wheels. He's amazing to watch, and people love to root for Lewis Hamilton. People all around the world do root for him and love it, and yeah, so anyway. So on the other hand, you have Nico Rosberg, who is less of a media rock star. He doesn't wear diamond earrings and gold chains like Lewis Hamilton does, but Nico is, on the other hand, he's quite erudite and educated. He speaks many languages. He's a very analytical driver, and he is said to be very involved in the entire process of setting up the car before every race, and really working directly alongside with his entire team and crew. So he's sort of the thinker, I think, on the grid. He is sometimes perceived as privileged, however. Nico comes from a racing family, had a racing father, and comes from a good deal of money. So I think that sometimes even Lewis Hamilton will kind of make jabs about the fact that Nico grew up with a silver spoon, or didn't have to work as hard, or isn't as hungry to win. Which, you know, you can make up your own mind about that. Lewis celebrates the fact that he came from humble upbringing, and I think sometimes there are issues of class, and some people relate to one side of that more than the other. So, however, while Nico does maybe not come off as down to earth sometimes, he is the king of qualifying. I call him the king of qualifying, because he had the most pole positions this year. He won the trophy for that, and I thought that was well deserved. He's excellent at qualifying, I think, because you're more in control. If anything, you're racing yourself, or you're racing a time. Nico struggles a little bit to be as ruthless as he needs to wheel, although a couple times we've seen him maybe even go too far. But most of the time he struggles to find that sweet spot between being assertive and still being safe and productive when it comes to overtaking. But he stays so calm and analytical under pressure, and he really never ever gives up, and he hates to give up. And I think that that's evidenced by his behavior in the final Grand Prix this year. So he struggles, though, to defend the pole positions that he earns, which is, it must be sort of rough because he works very hard to get pole position. There is speculation that he and his team have set his car up a little bit more, and his tire strategies as well, to accommodate qualifying better. And Lewis, may very well have his setup really, really focused on race day, and so, it's a different. There's different choices being made. There's different configurations, different strategies. But at the end of the day, I still say that qualifying just suits the kind of driver that Nico is, and racing and adrenaline and competition and fans cheering and shouting, I think, really feed Lewis Hamilton as a driver. So, especially when Lewis releases what they call hammer time. They say it's hammer time, Lewis. Hammer time is like Lewis Hamilton's limit break. I'm sure it's patented, hammer time. And so when Lewis goes into hammer time, into overtake mode, and they allow him to use this overtake, he almost never really struggles to pass up Nico. So that's obviously been a huge deciding fact. So, and in the final. He also, Nico, also compared to Lewis, doesn't start as well. Lewis, again, as evidenced in this final Grand Prix, Lewis typically gets a really great start. Not always. There have been a couple of times where he's had trouble starting. But typically Lewis gets off when it's lights out, and away we go. Lewis typically gets a great start. I think he even tries to intimidate the other drivers a little bit about the start, and Nico sometimes struggles, although he has definitely had the upper hand a number of times. So, of course, the very sad thing that happened this year had to do with Jules Bianchi and his crash, and I won't talk much about it because I think, everything that can be said has been said in a lot of ways. Jules Bianchi did crash, and he had been in an artificial coma in Japan for a long time, and was recently at least able to be moved to his home in France, so his family could still be with him. He is still in critical condition, and we all wish him all the strength and all the health that he needs. And it was, of course, a really somber reminder of the fact that, this is a dangerous sport, and there's a lot on the line, and there's every reason to keep improving safety, and to remember that, even though we want to always say the fans come first and the experience comes first and the racing comes first, safety, health, and life should, of course, always supersede that. So, anyway, like I mentioned about Sebastian Vettel, I just had a little note about Seb. He sort of had the end of an era this year, the era of Sebastian Vettel winning all the time. I think became sort of boring and maybe even obnoxious to some people. And they were ready for new champions, and now we have a big change up. But Sebastian is now moving on to a new team, and I'm pretty excited to see what happens this next season with him, so we'll see. DRS, or the drag reduction system, was still in use this season, and I think it's been around the way it exists now since about 2012, although not positive. And it continues to court controversy. Some people are still very anti-DRS because it feels a little bit like just throwing a monkey wrench in things for the sake of it. You know, it feels sort of just tricky or like a novelty. But what it does do certainly is promote overtaking, and the more overtaking, the more exciting the race, of course. The more overtaking there is, the more need there is to come in for pit stops as well, because you wear out your tires more, and so that also promotes a more exciting race. And it stresses the value of the gap. The gap being the space that you need between yourself and your closest competitor. Behind you, at this point, it's 1 second. If the following car, the pursuing car, is within 1 second of the car ahead at DRS activation zones, which there are typically 2, then they get to use and deploy DRS. Otherwise, they don't. So the gap becomes very, very vital. And DRS, I won't go into exactly how it works, but it opens up the wing to allow for better aerodynamics, and can give you just a little bit of extra speed to overtake your competitors. So it's an interesting thing, but some people like it. A lot of people still find it to be gimmicky. And speaking of gimmicky, the other gimmick that I think almost nobody likes is double points. Double points. So, double points were awarded at this year's last Grand Prix at Abu Dhabi. And I think happily, at least from my point of view, the double points didn't end up really deciding much. And, you know, it just feels a little bit, again, gimmicky. It's a way for the FIA to prolong the championship battle. It's less fun, of course, if the championship is decided before the final race, and so I think this is a way of keeping the suspense going. However, it seems a bit arbitrary. People don't completely... I don't think there's any drivers that love it, and I don't really... I don't personally know anyone who loves it, although I'm sure some people do, and I can understand why. Everybody, you know, has the same opportunity for those points, of course. And this year it was pretty funny because if it weren't for the double points, Nico really wouldn't have had a chance at the championship by the last race. But so people in the press kept asking him, you know, Nico, you were very outspoken about not liking double points to begin with in the season. You know, now what do you think of them? And Nico was pretty droll and said, you know, oh, I love double points. Double points are great. So it was kind of, those were funny moments of him being kind of snarky and silly about it. But anyway, so other things this year that were sort of rule changes and regulation changes and things like that. I mean, there were obviously a lot, and the formula changed a lot. The formula being how you're allowed to build the cars and their engines. But there was also the beginning of permanent numbers for your cars. So, you know, typically you have a big old number on your car. And the world champion is allowed to, not surprisingly, have a big number 1. You know what a 1 looks like, and this doesn't really look much like a 1, but I get this big number 1. And so Sebastian Vettel has been driving around with his number 1 all season. However, Lewis Hamilton said that he will be keeping his number, which is 44. If you can see, probably can't. Kind of there. Then, yeah, he'll be keeping 44. It's a special number to him and his dad, and he now has it tattooed behind his ear, and he won with it. So, yeah, he says he'll be keeping number 44. So, we'll see who has number 1. But anyway, those numbers are meant to be permanent now, so I'm not exactly sure how that plays out into the following years, and yeah, we'll see. But, this year also, they added, the FIA, I should say, they added a new rule mandating 5-second pit penalties. 5-second pit penalty. Let's say that 5 times fast. 5-second pit penalty. 5-second pit penalty. Anyway, they instituted these 5-second pit penalties for more minor infractions and smaller offenses during the race. So if you do get assigned this penalty, you serve it in the pit when you box, when you come into the pit. You have to sit there for 5 whole excruciating seconds. Your team isn't allowed to touch your car, help you out, or anything. And then it's game on. I would say that, you know, this idea of just serving the 5 seconds in the pit, it does make some sense. Instead of, you know, adding on anything afterward or making someone stop separately or slow down, or you know, it does make sense, I think, and it flows well to serve those in the pit. But unfortunately, I found that this rule was applied so sporadically that it just sort of made everybody angry. I don't think the drivers or the principals or the fans were sure when and where these would be applied. It seemed that sometimes there were, you know, penalties for certain drivers, and other drivers would get away with the same kind of breaches, depending on the day, depending on the track, depending on the moment, who knows what else. And so I think it became a little bit frustrating and confusing, although that out of everything is just my opinion, and so you may have a very good case, you know, to feel that they applied it very well and judiciously, so that's fine too. I just sometimes couldn't quite keep my head around it, and another one of the issues is that making major rule changes mid-season is so confusing and sort of confounding, because there were rule changes like bans or restrictions on team radio messages, how much you can communicate to your driver, and how much the driver just needs to know and be able to operate the car completely autonomously. And this is complicated because, yes, of course, we think these drivers should know their cars, they should know how to drive their cars, and, you know, how to get out of a tight situation. But at the same time, there are issues of safety, there are issues of emergency, and, you know, to say sort of halfway through the season, oh, you can't do any of this anymore, it's very jarring. And I think still not everybody was completely clear on what that meant, what that exactly applied to and what didn't. And we saw teams sometimes also what seemed to me like bending those rules, you they said that you're not supposed to communicate any more, direct information about what other drivers are doing, which does make sense. I can see that. But nothing that instructs them how to drive their own car, how to pick up speed, although you can tell them where they're losing speed, and I don't know. It's quite complicated, I suppose. So we'll see how that plays out next year. And of course, I have a little note. Oh, it's sad. Rest in peace, Caterham and Marusha. Although we did see Caterham back for the finale, for the last race. Although they have used crowdfunding, which is somewhat interesting. It costs a lot of money to race a Formula One team. A lot of money. It just blows my mind how much. And so they used crowdfunding to help keep Caterham on the track. And there were a lot of mixed opinions about whether or not that was okay. I think that Bernie, the head of the FIA, I think, there were so many people denouncing it. Even Martin Brundle was saying that he thinks it's ridiculous, crowdfunding for Caterham. But obviously, if people want to put their money there, they want to put their money there. So it's, again, that I don't really have an opinion on that. I like to see as many cars out there as possible, but I also like to see drivers that are capable, that are going to be safe, and that aren't going to create a lot of traffic or problems for, the drivers that are out there to win. So anyhow, next year I think we'll see more cost caps, global cost caps, and these are always, again, a little bit more convoluted than they seem. But perhaps cost caps will help us. And of course, there's still possibilities like a third car, all kinds of things. So, we'll see what happens. And either way, I'm really looking forward to next year. So it can't start soon enough for me, especially since I will be going to Montreal to the Grand Prix this year, which I think is in June. So if you're going to be there, let me know. And I'm excited about that. Some people have asked me why I'm going to Montreal instead of to Austin, where they have the circuit of the Americas. And there's two reasons. One, they're somewhat, they're not equidistant, but they're both, one's not so much farther away from the other for me. And two is, if I've never been to Montreal, I'd really like to go. And I just think I'll like the culture there better for the race. I think that the fans in Montreal are amazing. And I think that I've seen sometimes at the Circuit of Americas a lot of Texas culture, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I'm definitely a sort of a northern girl at heart. So I just have decided that I will have that Montreal will be more exciting for me. So anyhow, I wanted to ask you all who your driver of the year was, who you were most excited to see. So please, I hear that someone outside is making quite a lot of noise now, so I'll wrap up. But you are absolutely invited to tell me who your favorite driver of the season was. I'd love to hear about it. And don't worry, it won't hurt my feelings if you're not a Nico fan. There's a lot of drivers I love, and really only a couple that I don't like very much. So, Pastor Maldonado. Anyway, so like I said, I remain a fan of Nico's, but I hope that other teams can really compete this next year and really bring the fight, because watching the Silver Arrows just fly off into their own Sunday drive each race has been a little bit it hasn't been boring. It was such an exciting season, and all credit to Mercedes for this amazing car that they've shown to the world, and to the drivers who have done such an amazing job. But I'm really, really, really looking forward to what's next. And of course, there's always a lot of drama in the off season. And we still have lots of questions about who will be where, what will become of Jensen Button, all kinds of things. So I hope that it was a good season for you if you are a fan. And if you're not, thanks for listening anyway. It's always a pleasure just to chat with you. And I wish you the very, very best. And we will talk soon. Okay, bye guys.